Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I would like to welcome you to episode 76 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. In this episode, Mike Brown and I continue our World Cup report, this being World Cup Report Part 6. And this is the first of a two-part episode where we give some of our thoughts on the just concluded World Cup, FIFA, compliance and corruption. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today, along with my colleague and friend Mike Brown, we are continuing our World Cup series. As most everyone in the world knows, Germany won the championship on Sunday, so we're nearing the end, but we thought what we would do is in a two-part wrap up some of our thoughts about the World Cup, FIFA, anti-corruption compliance, and maybe talk about a little football. What Mike and I are going to try to do is we both pick some topics that we think are significant or important or at least have raised issues with us over the past several weeks. And we want to perhaps explore those and wrap all this up talking about what we see in the world of soccer maybe going forward. So with that, Mike, welcome. It's good to be back.
Thank you.
Sorry we're near at the end of our series.
Well, yeah, it's actually, I was thinking the other day how my day has been organized around doing these podcasts, so it's like I started to miss them. So I appreciate the opportunity to have some fun with you, and then hopefully have some discussions around this amazing topic of GRC and due diligence and all the things that you're trying to do on how to talk about just everyday real life situations and how it can apply to compliance. So it's been fun.
And we were visiting before we started. We're going to try to come up with something that perhaps you can send out to your clients and customers, tied around what I and we have been writing about on the World Cup, some of our thoughts from these podcasts, and make learning hopefully a little bit fun for some folks going forward.
Let's hope so. Yeah, the storylines that I kind of came up with, systems are we dealing with sort of causal effect issues, and the three storylines I came up with that just to kind of do a conclusion were the FIFA, the organization themselves, is topic number one. Topic number two was sort of deep pools of money, follow the money. And then topic number three were the results of a lot of injuries in this World Cup's games, and the significant impact these injuries had on teams and efforts, and so I just sort of wanted to go at a really high level and kind of begin to sort of narrow it down on what's going on, and then hopefully. Basically, tie compliance, due diligence, conversations along all three of those aspects of things. So,
okay, well, FIFA, the organization. What are either your thoughts, your new thoughts, or anything you've really learned over the past 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, there's the FIFA, the organization. It has been going through since the awarding of 2010. Has basically gone through this huge self-discovery. Self-management, self-change. It's sort of like I'm going to say it's such an embarrassment on how things were done that they began to implement what I would consider to be compliance policies. They still haven't implemented the transparency policies that you'd like to see. You'd like to see like some independent monitoring actually going on in a company that's say doing a $1.5 billion per year. So it's a fairly sizable company size, but they're starting to get it, is what I'm saying to you. And part of the getting it part is to see some of the anti-corruption things that they've been implementing in the betting side of it, the early warning and early monitoring side of it. I think the results of this year's World Cup, they didn't have any. Well, we haven't heard anything yet. But we haven't heard any bad things with corruption with setting up the games, and it may have been a policy change, a systemic change that they've made for the early warnings, and they've let people know about that. But I guess what it comes down to for me is they could make a few more simple policy changes that would completely turn around some of the questionable behaviors that you've been seeing over the time. In an example, for example, on a policy change that I would love to see them make is in the selection process. Let's say, for example, one policy change could be as simple as saying 80% of the stadiums in a country have to be freestanding or already standing for them to award a selection of the World Cup. So, in the Qatar case or Qatar case, they actually have to build something like 12 stadiums from scratch. In an area, they have to build like 12 stadiums that are like, for example, the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, like, completely sealed, covered up to protect it in a square mile area that's you live in Houston area, in the Houston area size part of land. And so it seems like simple policy changes can make a dramatic impact on the selection process, and it would seem to make a lot of sense. Do you have any kind of simple policy changes you could see them make as an organization that would eliminate some of the potential corruption issues that you're seeing written about?
Well, I guess the thing that I see is the easiest is really just either the light of day or sunshine, whatever you may call transparency and visibility.
Transparency.
If you have more transparency in the bidding process, for instance, I think that would keep a lot of national soccer or football organizations from taking money from other countries, or would not necessarily name and shame, but just shame countries into doing things more along the lines of the rules, or at least the spirit of the rules. Having some sort of requirement that you've articulated seems to me that you've now made it only the haves can't host World Cup games going forward, and I think that's something that I credit FIFA for, pushing soccer into Africa, emphasizing other places, Asia. So by making a requirement that you have 80% of your stadiums built, that might limit some areas from bidding that would otherwise have the chance. And then the other thing is really, are we stifling innovation? Because I did some compliance work for an electrical company here in Houston, a large electrical concern, and wasn't a generating company, but they were interested in the Qatari bid simply because they were going to have to develop new technologies and in some of the harshest conditions in the world. And if you can develop those sorts of things in places like Qatar, where you can actually, in an energy efficiently manner, air conditioning a stadium for 40 to 70,000 people, I think what you could use with that technology in other areas of the world. So I guess I would just advocate more transparency along the line of the process. I know that early on, or at least midway through the tournament, there were allegations of bid or game fixing against certain African countries. Those have not panned out, so I won't name those countries. But there were those. But the early warning system, that's something that many other sports organizations may want to take a look at. Having spent a fair amount of time in Las Vegas and seeing lots of late money dumped into football games where betting is legal, smart money coming in late, something like that. When you have those sorts of large swings as identified in Asia, for instance, on games within 48 to 24 hours before a game, that clearly is a red flag that something is going on, and we haven't heard about that. It's going to be very interesting to see, and one of the reasons I've held off on finishing up my ebook is that I want to see what the report on the Qatari bid investigation is going to turn
the
up.
Michael Garcia stuff that's
Right,
going to be coming
right.
up. Yeah. Yeah, the thing is, I understand exactly what you're saying on the opportunity side of it, and I would love to have those kind of conversations become transparent, like opportunity issues. So whether it's 80% or 50%, I'm not trying to do a percentage. I'm just trying to say simple policy changes can make a dramatic impact. And an example, what I'm trying to also reach to is if they made a policy that all the refs were professional refs,
Yes.
okay, and all the refs came from the leagues around there, and all the refs had enhanced due diligence done on them to make sure that and done annually, right? As well as pretty much all the the leaders in the FIFA organization, but then simple policy changes such as that can have dramatic impact on procedures, and therefore the chances of corruption not happening or happening. And the reason why I selected as one of those three major storyline topics was injuries. And the injuries, clearly on Neymar's case, and that's just the latest one, with his broken back issue. If a policy change, even from, for example, keeping your elbows down and getting red cards, just like you get red cards for cleats up, okay, would and could dramatically change some of the outcomes of some of the games. So I'm going to throw it back to you and say, okay, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, are you tying the injuries, all of the issues you raised along the lines of that, your point 3, into professionalism of the referee corps?
I am. I'm saying to you that injuries that I've seen happen in many of the professional sides of the games happen due to aggressiveness, but almost all the kind of injuries, like for example, the Neymar injury was a game out of control,
right,
by the ref, right, and so I was just trying to also attach that if you had certain behaviors that were damaging, like behaviors like elbows high, hands up in the air, face kind of stuff, and the teams and the players know they can be thrown out with a red card with this kind of behavior, then you're going to watch them change on how they actually do things.
Right.
And so, yes, I'm actually saying that having a professional referee, you can actually have 4 years of watching a referee qualify, see what kind of games he runs, has do due diligence on his professionalism on calling games, and then what you'd want to have is, by the time the finals come around, is that those refs who have qualified have graded out very similar to exactly the way the reffing is done, for example, in the National Football League. Okay, as far as a policy mantra. You would see that the best refs, the best linemen, the best teams, there would be no controversial issues on who would actually be calling the games.
Right. I guess equally troubling with the injuries caused by the games getting out of control, and specifically the Brazilian-Costa Rican game or Colombian game, was the injuries, the head injuries.
Right.
And we saw more than one example, and unfortunately we saw an example in the finals of a German player who clearly sustained some type of head injury. Whether it was a concussion, I don't know, or we don't know as yet.
Right.
But he was allowed to come back in the game. He was wandering, and he ended up collapsing.
Right.
And that is an area of player safety that I don't think that there's any justification for not having some system in place.
Agreed.
Now, if for those of you not familiar with soccer, you only have 3 substitutions. And
Right.
when you take an injured player off, you're not allowed to freely substitute back in
Right.
because that injured player has to go off for some period of time, has to be evaluated, and you're a man down. So you're double penalized if you
Right.
substitute. But there's got to be some solution to a head injury. Clearly, that player had sustained something. When you collapse and are walked off with help because you're in such a daze and you don't remember anything about it, that
Right.
means you sustained a concussion.
I mean, so this is part of the innovation part, right? Too, is that there's no reason in the world that you couldn't use, for example, replay to find out if the player did get, hit, aggressively on the head, right? So you know that there's a real blow that occurs, and if a real blow that occurs, why not waive the substitution
Right.
law, right? And say the player's health is more important than only having 3 subs. Okay, now they can game the system, but if you actually have some of the technology available to not game the system, then you're deploying modern day technology. So
Right. I may have to stop citing to you as the guy for Follow the Money to why don't you use technology?
Well, I mean, yeah, I 30 years of technology technology work. It's probably my easiest thing to go to, but in reality, see, what I'm trying to link is, for the practitioners of compliance, is simple policy changes can have dramatic impacts on performance, and then what you really want to do is then make sure you monitor it and you actually do the work and you actually do the due diligence and you make sure that you actually get underneath the aspect of it. And then as you start to look at this stuff, when I say due diligence, is you start to plan for worst case scenarios. Use the due diligence as a planning tool to help you facilitate sort of the worst case aspects of things. And so, as I indicated, like a policy change, for example, on selection, it would have Qatar as a location of being able to do the World Cup. Now, if that was the case, you look at other policy changes like transparency, as you indicated, the idea of following the money. So when I look at following the money, I look at these deep pools of opportunity, right? So you have these construction areas. And so what we're trying to talk about is, elimination of corruption, right? And, in this case, we have 1 billion people watching one day's worth, basically say 2 hours worth of soccer, right? That's 10 times the number of people that watch the Super Bowl or in the world. It's a 10-to-1 change. So the impact of this 2-hour event is huge, right? And so I'm saying to you is that when there's a lot of money associated with construction, advertisements, building, that's construction. But the idea is that you look at putting together policies and procedures to help you eliminate it. That's all. It's a simple concept, but I think isn't that the concept of what compliance is really about?
Well, it seems to me you're actually advocating an alignment of the money, i.e. sponsorship, right, with the sport.
Yep.
Did I hear that right?
You did. There's it's an interesting thing, right? You've got just for some clarity, in the world, there's about $545 billion spent this next year, 2014, in advertising. Okay, which in business math, it would drive something like $3 trillion worth of sales. Now that's this is just simple rules of math for 20% of the spend. But the point is that in Brazil, the amount of advertising was about $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion, specifically for the 4 weeks of the year to grow sales and to grow branding. And so, if you want to talk about a brand value and adverse media, you have these corporate sponsors that are World Cup sponsors. You have FIFA sponsors, and then you have national sponsors. So you have three categories of advertising sponsors that are all retail based. And don't you want to associate with your brand with really outstanding behavior, outstanding ethical treatment of like if you're, for example, like you said, technology advancements. That's exactly what you want to have yourself branded with. You don't want to be branded with being a brand that's someone who supports human trafficking, for example.
Well, I mean, Nike runs the University of Oregon athletic department. Do we want them running World Cup? Is that in the interest of all of us?
I'm not going to talk to you about Oregon, being an Oregon State person here, which is the arch enemy part. But I think Nike also contributes to directions on Oregon State. But yes, if there's a lot of money associated with advertisement, if there's a lot of money associated with contributions, I absolutely believe transparency is critical. Absolutely believe that due diligence of business transactions are critical. So I don't know. What are your thoughts now?
No, your point is well taken that the money will change behavior, and the sponsorships will change behavior if they do have the courage of their convictions to say we're not going to be associated with a place that engages in labor employment practices where there's a death count of people who are building these stadiums, or other indicia of bribery and corruption. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the Garcia report turns up for us. I think we're probably one more thought on that, on the Garcia stuff / Brazil.
What most people don't really realize is that Manasseh, is that how you say that location, that stadium that's in the middle of the Amazon?
Right.
There's almost no access from roads. You can only fly into it, right? And you have this huge stadium which they have no plans of using for soccer beyond 4 weeks of the World Cup.
Right.
They spent a couple $100 million in building that one specific stadium.
Right.
And the allegations of corruption pretty high. The question I have is what's going to happen to that stadium? And as we look back on things like the Olympics, what happens at Sochi, what happens in China, did these physical stadiums are they going to be used for soccer, or are they going to be completely abandoned? And it will be interesting to kind of reflect a year from now what actually is happening to that stadium.
Well, probably just to spite you, they're going to hold half of the 2016 Olympics there, just to show you that they can put on an Olympics in the middle of the Amazon. So
yes, they probably will.
Yes. Mike, with that, we're at the end of this part. For those of you listening, we're going to have this is the first of a two-part podcast, so I hope you will join us for our next episode. Thanks for watching and or listening.